Because it's not, at the end of the day, leadership is not about you. It's about the team. It's about the customer.
Can you say that again? Because I think everybody needs to hear that.
It's not about the leader. It's not about the CEO. It's about the team. It's about the firm. It's about the stakeholders. Mm-hmm. And, organizations that we've studied that perform at the very top of their sector, not in the top 10%, but at the very top, are very, very good at engaging all of their stakeholder groups, not just shareholders, not just management, but they're engaging their provider community. They're engaging the community at large. They're engaging their customers. And so they're very careful to take a holistic approach. And, look, leadership is a huge responsibility. It's a huge responsibility. And when people put their trust in us and, we owe them. We owe them humility. We owe them attention. We owe them, and it's hard.
Guys, welcome to the new episode of 100% Tilted. Your host, Michael David, as we are the show where we love to hear the stories of winning underdogs. Today we have a guest that I have been looking forward to sitting down to talk with, because there's so much that this gentleman has done in his career in an impact that I think whether you have the ambition of starting a business, you own a business, or you have dreams of building a big business and even maybe taking it public, there are going to be some things that you're going to want to listen to and even write down and take notes with and execute. Because the thing that this man has done and the impact that he has made in many organizations, you can definitely impact in your own. Hometown of Tulsa, Oklahoma, building a real-world leadership team since 1975. Our guest has been a student and an innovator in the area of human capital leadership. The author of High Performance Human Capital Leadership, published in 2010, which we have right here in front of us. Now, who is this guy? An undergraduate degree from Our Lady of the Lake University in San Antonio. But the interesting thing to note is while attending classes on weekends, he managed the Southwestern Division for National Convenience Stores in 1991. Now, he completed his graduate work in business at the University of Texas at Austin in 1996, while serving as executive vice president of an East Coast executive search firm. Not overambitious in the least. Completed the leading professional service firms program at the Harvard Business School in 2007. Rob's personal consulting practice focuses clients where they run the gamut from 6 million privately held enterprises to 75+ billion publicly held multinational corporations. In 1975, he was one of the youngest store managers in the history of Safeway. Guys, I am honored and proud to sit at the table with this man, Rob Andrews, the CEO of Allen Austin Global Executive Search.
Thank you.
How's that for an intro?
Good to be here.
So I read your book, and diving in and looking at to really what you do. Leadership is, from my experience, has been a term that is grossly misunderstood.
I agree.
And even how to lead people versus just telling them what to do. Owning a business versus leading people to help you build your business. There's such a wide gap that I've seen, because everybody has the ambitions of greatness. But how do you really get there? And, it doesn't come down to spreadsheets. It doesn't come down to the nuts and bolts. It really comes down to what I've always called the people pickle, because that is the hardest thing to really try to attempt to master. But you've certainly done so much work and research that you're not only the ideas that you have are one thing, but also the practical side of how you've executed it and the results that you get to continually reevaluate what works and what doesn't. So honestly, my first question, what was your catalyst, the aha moment that really got you to want to focus on or even draw you to human capital? And what is human capital?
Well, human capital is how we deal with people. From the very first time they encounter our brand to the time they leave us, for whatever reason. I mean, it's everything from employment brand, how we attract people, how we engage them, hopefully with purpose, mission, vision, values, how we onboard them. It's how we compensate them, how we reward them. It's all of those things. And so your question was, what was the catalyst or what was the aha moment that drew me to this area of study? And it wasn't an aha moment at the time. You mentioned that I was with Safeway Stores, Inc. back in the day, and from the time I was 16 to the time I was almost 25, and I didn't know it back then. But what I was experiencing was phenomenal leadership. We had
Safeway.
At Safeway, we had a number 2 operator. His title was retail operations manager, but he essentially ran the division. He took us from 0 stores to about 90 over an 8-year period here in Houston. Very difficult because none of us knew what we were doing. Couldn't get a lot of people who were interested in moving from one of the other divisions to Houston. So he grew it from the ground up, and I didn't realize back then, couldn't have because I didn't have enough context, that this man was a phenomenal leader. He was not out of central casting. He didn't have a degree. He had spent 10 years as a produce department manager, for goodness sake. So he was not somebody you would look at and say, well, this guy's tailor-made for greatness.
Right.
But he was one of those leaders who painted a very clear picture of what he wanted and why. He talked a lot about the why. He made it clear that we weren't there to please him, that we were there to please the customer. That was our purpose. And he treated us like adults. He took an interest in us. As a 18-year-old management trainee, he sent me to Toastmasters and to Dale Carnegie. He sent me as a 19-year-old assistant manager to Austin to train under a different leader for a year.
Wow.
And I wasn't the only one. I mean, he took an interest in young people. He had very high standards, but no one was afraid of him. So, I mean, this guy really kind of set the bar for me in terms of what I look for in a leader. And so, obviously our view has been refined over the years. But the guy who replaced him was not a good guy. He was not a good leader, and he didn't. He might have fancied himself as a good manager, but he was a terrible leader. And so he pretty much destroyed a very powerful division inside of a year. He lost 44 out of 90 store managers, 4 out of 8 district managers, and so that still sticks in my mind today. And that was that was decades ago.
So you said a really interesting point. He could manage, but clearly he couldn't lead.
The guy who replaced him could
manage processes, the utility of the business.
Yeah,
right?
he was basically a micromanager.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Big difference between management and leadership. What
is that difference? What is it the EQ element of the individual that their interest is in about seeing people grow instead of necessarily the business growing? Because I think when your focus is aligned with the people, whether it's your internal customer as well as your external customer, then that's where you see the needle move in the positive direction. But if you just focus on the utility or the P&L, do you see a disparity in people being able to even buy into the vision because they kind of almost feel like they're being sold? I know I just threw a lot at you.
You're close. So
okay.
It's really interesting to me that after decades of study and really examining organizations that perform at the very top of their sector, which is about our next book. That's what it's about. And it's a lifelong study. It's an architecture to help organizations build peak performance cultures. Interesting tidbit in this is that leaders that I've studied, guys like Bob Alward, who was the CEO at Quiddity until he recently retired, it's a guy we placed 8.5 years ago. Chet Cadjo, who runs Quick Trip. The list goes on. Ron Scheich, when he ran Panera Bread. All the leaders we've studied, they all have a little bit of self-doubt. And it shows up as humility. It shows up as, I don't know it all. I'm not I'm not the shell answer man.
Because that's
I'm
ego.
Not, yeah, and so
which is usually rooted in a deep insecurity, right?
Usually, yeah, yeah. So knowing that you don't know it all, regardless of how much study
That's
you've
so
done,
hard for people though, especially at a top position, because I think the assumption is they feel like they have to know everything.
Right.
My grandfather gave me this nugget. He gave me a handful before he passed, and I was in my early 20s, and he said, the one thing I can advise you on is, as you grow in your career, the most effective people in management are the ones that don't know everything, but they build a team around them that collectively do.
Right, right.
And that always stuck with me, because that speaks humility, that speaks people, that speaks heart, that speaks wanting to, there's no fear.
Right.
You're not afraid to hire somebody smarter than you because you know it's going to help everybody in the long run.
Right.
Right.
Because it's not, at the end of the day, leadership is not about you. It's about the team. It's about the customer.
Can you say that again? Because I think everybody needs to hear that.
It's not about the leader. It's not about the CEO. It's about the team. It's about the firm. It's about the stakeholders. Mm-hmm. And, organizations that we've studied that perform at the very top of their sector, not in the top 10%, but at the very top, are very, very good at engaging all of their stakeholder groups, not just shareholders, not just management, but they're engaging their provider community. They're engaging the community at large. They're engaging their customers. And so they're very careful to take a holistic approach. And, look, leadership is a huge responsibility. It's a huge responsibility. And when people put their trust in us, and, we owe them. We owe them humility. We owe them attention. We owe them, and it's hard. Look, I mean, I've written the books. We'll publish our second book, Total Performance Leadership, hopefully early next year. And even though I've done all the research, and we've built a very effective architecture to help leaders build cultures, it's still hard. There is nothing easy about this. We can give you a roadmap. We can coach you, but at the end of the day, it takes patience, humility, and this constant knowledge, this constant awareness that it's not about you. It's just not. So
I was listening to this podcast. They were actually talking about relationships, which leadership is all about relationships.
Exactly.
And this one is really more in relation to marriage. And I thought it was such a great perspective. And it said, it's not what I can do for you and how I can make you happy. I'm going to do everything to make me the best, because that's the best way that I can help you is help me become the best version of me in every capacity I can be, because that in turn is actually serving that other individual, the spouse, the significant other. And when you look at leadership and teams and staff, I'm gonna do everything to improve me. I'm gonna work on me. I'm gonna, we all have our hangups, because I feel like that's one level of service. Is it's not, because we talk about leadership as service. You mentioned that, but I find a lot of people have a hard time understanding what that means when you serve as a leader. Some people think, well, I just need to let my team do whatever they want to do, and that's going to make them happy. And that's not serving.
No.
You have to have accountability, right?
Certainly.
But you also have to find the ways to make sure that when you're serving your team, you're serving them the best version of you possibly can, because that really in the end is what's going to be inspiring them.
Right.
Not be like me, but I'm going to help you become the best version of you by becoming the best version of me.
Yeah.
Would that, when you look at, especially a lot of small business owners, when you may have, teams of 5 to 10, most small businesses, 38 million in America, are, less than 500 employees, typically less than 100 really. It's very much a family. Mm-hmm. How can you, and this is one question I really wanted to ask you, because you have so much data and research. How can a leader in an organization get people who are not the owner to think like an owner, make decisions like an owner, and act like an owner when they're not? How do you get them on board to do that? Because that ultimately helps the customer, the team, and everybody. But unless you're an owner, you're looking at it from a 90,000 foot view.
Right.
But how can you get people to go from 9 to 5, clock in and out, to feeling as though they're a part of something that's worth giving more than mediocre at best?
Right. So that's a great question. So, I mean, so our total performance leadership architecture is a roadmap to that, to making people feel like owners. But it all starts with mindset. It all starts with the realization that this is a journey. This is something you start that never ends, and it's not easy. You know, I've said that several times, but it starts with the mindset that says I want my people to feel like owners. You know, I felt more like an owner in the first 8 years I was with Safeway stores than a lot of people do who have real equity in professional services firms or whatever. So it's not, you can't do stuff. You can't check boxes and accomplish any kind of transformation. If your objective is to make your employees feel like an owner, you know, like we paid BDO a whole bunch of money to build for us a compensation plan that's designed to make everybody feel like an owner. I mean, we're overt about that. We pay out performance bonuses based on quantitative and qualitative contributions to the firm. I get evaluated by 17 people. Everyone in the firm gets evaluated, and so that affects your compensation. But I could do all those things and still have people feel, not connected if I don't treat them well. If we don't do things internally, you know, it's not about what you can't write this stuff on a piece of paper and assume it's done.
Right.
It's more about what you do rather than what you say.
You can say everything perfect, give the right compensation plan, the whole pathway to success, but it's really a 50-50, right? You can't carry people along. No. They have to have the willingness, but also the personal standard to be able to rise up to a level of themselves that they haven't, that you see, but they don't.
Right.
Which requires a lot of trust.
Right.
But is it just money?
No, not at all. And I've had the privilege of interviewing, you know, a whole bunch of CEOs who have built really powerful cultures. You know, Chet Cadjo, who runs Quick Trip, and many others.
Phenomenal story, and I'd love to hear more about that.
Just an absolutely phenomenal company and a phenomenal leader who's got a very long list of things he does. But it's not about checking the boxes. It's what's in it. It's what's in his heart. We had but to your point, we had one of our CEOs in our conference room here a couple of weeks ago, and it's the guy we placed, 8 years ago. He's been a screaming success. He's built a powerful culture and is better than doubled his EBITDA over 8 years. He's tripled his revenues. He's got total workforce turnover less than 5%, and it was runaway turnover when he took it over. Wow! So he's built this magnificent culture, and he's writing a book. So I'm gonna refer you to him as well, but because he's a phenomenal leader. But he said, his name is Bob Alward, and he said one of the Bobisms, I think that's the way he referred to it, is I'm not in the people fixing business. Now that might sound harsh. There's nothing harsh about this man.
But that's very honest.
I mean, he's
you have to fix yourself.
Well, not only that, you do have to. John Maxwell, who's my favorite leadership author of all time, has written. I used to say he's written 11 books, but every time I look up, he's written a new one. But he says it's model, mentor, motivate, multiply. So first you have to model the behavior that you want to see replicated in your organization. So you model, mentor, motivate, and then multiply. So Alward said, I'm not in the people fixing business. And what I mean by that is you got to be careful about misreading what he's saying. He's not saying that he's not willing to spend time with people. He's not saying that he's not willing to coach people. He's willing to do all those things. He's willing to invest in coaching. Third-party coaching for his up-and-coming leaders. But they have to be able to, the people that are being coached have to meet them halfway. They have to be willing. They have to be coachable. And part of that,
being coachable,
part of that is the way they hire. So Chet Cadjo, who runs Quick Trip, who has 950 or so stores in
small company.
I think 17 major markets at this point,
Yeah.
33,000 employees, has total workforce turnover less than 10% in the convenience store business, and 100 people apply for every position they hire.
Wow.
So these are performance metrics that aren't even believable. Per store profits double his next closest competitor. Now, so you say, well, how do you do all that?
That is unreal.
For 59 years, I believe it is, Quick Trip has been driven by purpose, and it's a very simple purpose: to provide opportunity for employees to grow and succeed. And that drives everything they do, every single thing they do.
But a lot of companies have those, I call them platitude statements.
Yeah, but this is for real. And so I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about, and it goes directly to your question. Quick Trip goes to great lengths to produce collateral and to communicate what their culture is all about. They have very clear behaviors. I mean, it's just all public knowledge. I mean, you can look on their website. There are Harvard case studies that have been done about Quick Trip, but they do not hire people who don't want to work hard, and they're not bashful about it. So if you want to come to work for Quick Trip, and obviously people do, or there wouldn't be 100 people apply for every position
Absolutely,
they hire,
yeah.
You come to work, and they hire people to work 48 hours a week, not 40 hours a week. So it's not one of these companies you'd go to play ping pong, or it's not that. This is a company where you come to be number one. You come to win. You come to be a part of that culture, and they're very deliberate about it. And I spent a half a day interviewing Chet Cadjo when I first started the Total Performance Leadership Study, and he said, I couldn't help but laugh, but he said, when we do get it wrong, and occasionally we do, we have somebody leave us and they say, these people are crazy. I mean, this is like a cult. These people are off their.
We were just talking about
they're
that
out of their
today.
minds.
Yeah,
and they are. And because of that, and because of the way Chet communicates, you can walk into just about any Quick Trip store anywhere in the country, and they're opening these things like popcorn.
Yeah,
they just opened 50 in Denver.
Wow.
You can walk into just about any store and ask anybody, any clerk, any assistant manager, what's Chet Cadjo up to? What are you working on? What are you guys trying to do? And they can tell you. So if you get
he's that transparent.
There's a formula for this.
Okay.
I mean, one of the principles that we teach in our architecture is clarity in communications. Clarity in communications.
Yeah, that's huge.
Huge. And the way, and
so many people try to hide behind the curtain of like the office or the C-suite, right? And like they only kind of like trickle out a little bit here and there.
And it's just, but there's a formula for communicating effectively and with clarity. And without it, most companies fail. I did a blog post a couple of weeks ago. Accenture put out their annual report. It's a great piece of research. 5%, they estimate 5% of the companies on the planet do a good job with people. 5%. That means 95% are not doing it. And so the communications piece is a big deal. When you're frontline employees, in the leadership architecture we teach, there's a way. There are 9 principles that we've observed in organizations that knock the ball out of the park. But they're not just principles. There's a diagnostic tool to determine where you are against those principles, and there's a way to tell whether or not those principles are actually at work in your company. In this case, the litmus test in terms of if your leadership is unified, if your communications are clear, is what happens on the front line. If your frontline employees and your customers know what you're up to, then you can pretty much rest assured that your leadership is aligned, cohesive, and that you have clarity in communications. In most cases, that's just not the case.
So the 95%, clearly at scale, there is a lack of communication, a lack of clarity.
Mm-hmm.
But so many do think they're doing a pretty okay job.
Sure.
What would be
against what standard?
So that's my question. For those that are listening that have businesses right now that they think they're doing an okay job, right? They have a lower turnover. They seem to feel like there is somewhat of a culture, but they're still just grinding.
Right.
What would be something that they could, like one or two things they could look at in their business right now to go, maybe it's not as good as I think it is?
Fantastic question. So because our purpose, we're a purpose-driven firm, because our purpose is to enhance the lives and the effectiveness of our associates first, clients and stakeholders. Because
but your associates first.
Yeah, because I can't possibly hope to provide a great member or customer experience unless we're doing it here.
Mm-hmm.
But we have a fairly simple set of diagnostics. You could do it every year, and it's not, it's cost effective, it's resource effective. There's a way to go in and check the overall health and strength of your culture against the 9 principles. So you wouldn't, most people who care about their physical health wouldn't think of going, more than a year or maybe 2 without having a full physical, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want to get everything checked out, get your heart, your triglycerides, your cholesterol, all that. So we do those kinds of things, generally speaking, automatically, but we don't think about our organizational health.
Are they making assumptions based on certain KPIs that really are not even related to?
I believe that
dollars are up, so everything's good.
I think that, Jim Collins, who, I've read everything he's written, said that most business people have what he calls a quantitative bias.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's any real mystery why that is. I mean, this is what we're teaching in our business schools. I mean, we're in the process of getting involved with the University of Texas at Austin's, Center for Leadership and Ethics. Mm-hmm. We're going to be speaking to their graduate students in a couple of different venues. One of the things we're trying to do to make the world a better place is to teach more than just what's being taught in our colleges and business schools today, because what we're teaching basically are quantitative things. Mm-hmm. The best MBA programs in the country. Where are they falling short? It's the quantitative bias, I believe. Mm-hmm. The MBA programs today, we're teaching basically the same thing we taught 30 years ago. There's 2 units of economics, 2 units of accounting. There's the capstone course, the operations research. There's a marketing course. There may be one course on leadership, but we're not tying things together. And so what we have is we've got the vast majority, of our business leaders out there who are leading quantitatively. We have private equity firms. They're populated with very, very smart, very highly educated, many of them Ivy League MBAs, and I got nothing against Ivy League MBAs, but they have a quantitative bias, and it's not because they want to; it's because that's the way they've been trained. So it's no big secret to that's an issue for us globally. So it's interesting when I'm interviewed and studied, a lot of these organizations that perform, as I've said repeatedly, at the very top of their sectors. They are all led by not all of them call it purpose, although most do, but they're either led by a clear purpose or a mission that says, hey, we're trying to do something greater than just making money. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, also a lot of these are faith-based organizations. So I don't think that's any real coincidence. I mean, they're led by people who are there to do something greater than just making money. One of our big passions here is to build architectures, to do research, to write and to speak and to educate people on, there's a way to do this. There's a way to run businesses where, by the way, you do make more money. A lot more money, but making a lot of money is a consequence. It's a byproduct of doing all these other things. It's a byproduct of a purpose greater than just making money.
Wow. I
I
hope people heard that.
Otherwise, how are you going to engage millennials? I mean, you think you're good. I mean, I was at lunch with a CEO. I actually used this conversation as a litmus test to figure out whether or not I want to do business with someone. Mm-hmm. So I'm at a lunch meeting a few years ago with the CEO of a $1.8 billion publicly held oil field services company. And I'm telling stories about things we're learning in this architecture and how fascinating they are. And, guys like Chet and Bob Howard and Ron Scheich and, many, many others. And when I was talking about purpose, he looked at me like I was from a different planet. Mm. And he said, and I quote, "I thought the purpose of an organization was to increase shareholder value." Okay, well, that's a fiduciary responsibility. If you're a publicly held company, you do have that responsibility legally, but good luck engaging your workforce with that.
Right, because people aren't going to buy into that vision.
No, I mean
they're working for somebody else at that point. They're patting somebody else's pocket. There's no win-win for no win-win.
So I think back to the first 8 of my 9 years with Safeway. We had a purpose. We weren't there. The boss made it clear we weren't there to please him. We were there to please Mrs. Jones. We were there to please the customer, and that gave us a sense of purpose, and it made our work fun. And we knew what we were trying to do. We knew how we fit in. We knew everything that was going on in the division. Very clear communications, and we were pretty big. I
remember my first one of my first jobs was McDonald's.
Yep.
And the franchise owner, Bill Hatfield, he owned 3, and he had the final interview with every single employee hired. I'll never forget this. Went to his office that he had, and he reminded me a lot of my grandfather. And he goes, "The only thing I want you to do is make sure that every customer is happy."
Powerful.
And that stuck with me. And then his daughter was kind of the GM of all of his 3 locations, and I remember she came over and she said, "Make sure you didn't sound like you were making them happy." Well, I gave them everything they wanted. She goes, "Yes, but give them that smile, make them feel appreciated, make them feel," because a lot of people, morning rush, and I worked the mornings. She goes, "They're going to work. Make them happy before they get there." That stuck with me because that's such a core element for him that he wanted to instill that. But the fact that he wanted to interview every single person, minimum wage worker that worked in all 3 of those locations, it baffled me because you don't see a lot of that,
right?
But that certainly gave you I met the owner, with that, living in a small town. Yep. But Brookshire's was the next job I had after that, and I was in Marshall, actually, in East Texas. The store manager, same kind of thing. Make sure, because of course we took the groceries out to the car and the handshake got the tips, but he goes, make sure that they're just really happy. It was a really very much an identical mirrored approach. Right. And he grew up in that town. That's where he first started working. So for him, he had a lot of these relationships with the community, but he wanted to make sure that everybody, cashiers, sackers, and everybody that worked in the store, didn't matter what you did, you helped and you made sure that they were happy.
Yeah. Yeah. And and there has to be a formula for that as well. I think back to the heyday of Pappas Brothers restaurants when they did it better than anybody else in the world, at least as far as I've seen. And I've been all over the world studying best practices and customer experience engineering. I think they've slipped now, but at one point in time, it was the law that you don't lose a customer. And everyone, I think they had 175 restaurants at one point.
Wow.
And everyone was educated about the lifetime value of a customer and what it costs to lose one customer. It's a whole lot cheaper to keep one customer than it is to go get a new one.
Right.
Because when you lose a customer,
it's about 80%.
You don't lose the $100 tonight.
Yeah.
You lose that times 3 times a week that they eat in your restaurant, times 52 weeks, times however many weeks they're going to eat in your restaurant.
And then maybe the 5 or 6 additional customers they bring in.
And the stories they tell.
Yeah.
That's the big deal.
Yeah.
Home Depot, when they were growing under Bernie Marcus and Ken Langone, I mean, they built this amazing culture in which, the customer was, employees and customers were what mattered.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting that Bernie and Ken both got fired from their previous employer for breaking the rules, because they were really about doing the right thing for the customer and the employees, and that is not always. It's too bad, but it's not always compatible with corporate culture.
There's some companies that I've seen that the sentiment is almost like the company is doing the employee a favor. And it's like people feel like they're an indentured servant. Right. That, thank you for the paycheck, so of course they would give bare minimal. So that, for so many companies that they're doing well, but they could be doing better if they focused on the internal customer first, then the external customer. Because then if you do that, then your internal customers, your team are then going to mirror that vision and purpose.
Right.
One of my favorite books about leadership is Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink.
Yeah, sure.
And the thing that resonated with me, and I saw him talking about this, and he said, this came from, it was live or die. And so, yes, it could be somebody's fault, but ultimately it had to be my responsibility. Mm-hmm. And the adage of attitude is reflective of leadership. Right. It's so easy to want to criticize what somebody's doing wrong, or that was their fault, or this happened, or conditions, temperament, environment, whatever. But when you go, okay, I see my team or my company is not doing well, where did I go wrong? That doesn't seem to happen much. Or what can I do to improve versus who can I just tell to do better?
Right. So this is, this is a combination lock. This is not just one thing. So, so the leader, the leader absolutely has to, I interviewed one guy who runs a 40,000 employee publicly held company. They're in the trash business, so it's not a real sexy business, very profitable though. And he said, anytime something's wrong in my organization, I go away and think, what am I doing wrong? Where can I improve? That's a piece of the puzzle. But you also have to have, in the book Extreme Ownership, Jocko also talks about that works both ways.
Yes. Extreme
ownership works up and down the chain of command. So
absolutely.
It's you have to teach this stuff. That it is the, so Jocko's one of 64,000 special operators at the time, and but his command, everybody in his command has to understand that it's their responsibility to make sure they're aligned, and that responsibility goes both ways. So there's, as I said earlier, this is not easy, but it starts with a mindset that says this is the way we're going to operate. And I'll just throw in one other thing. There, in our studies over the last 10 years, and going in and helping organizations who didn't think they have a purpose, who didn't have a clearly articulated purpose, many of them do. They just don't know it. And so sometimes those diagnostics help that stuff bubble up to the top. We had one client who engaged us to do a search. They engaged us to do a retained executive search for a president to open up new markets for them. In the process of doing that needs analysis, we discovered that their customers and their employees were saying things that I don't believe the senior leadership was even really cognizant of. So the customers would say things like, this company, these guys have our back. Now, the company does production home builder surveys. So they do a very small, just a really small sliver of the overall home building, thing. And it's a very tiny little piece of the expense, in a $500,000 home, the survey is, less than $1,000. But they had, because of the way the DNA in the firm, in the company, they looked out for their customers. If they saw something on a job site and it didn't have anything to do with their surveying, but they thought that the customer needed to know about it, they'd pick up the phone and call. So they developed a reputation of being, of having their customers' backs. if you looked a little closer, you could see that attitude permeated within the organization. They took care of their people. And so they really did have a purpose, and we now have a purpose statement, but they didn't have one before. So it's kind of interesting. You can have a purpose and not know it. You can have a purpose statement and not have one.
How would a business even go from a point where, they have just been growing and things have been working, but how do you go from grinding in your business to then thinking, okay, what is the purpose of our business? And then how do they begin to integrate that into a company that maybe are kind of used to the old way that it's been going for a long time? How do you move an organization from just going forward to building a culture and really getting people to buy into that? Like, where would somebody start if maybe they have been struggling in that way?
So I just, there's a million stories I could tell you, but I'll just tell you one.
Okay.
So in 1987, Charles Butt decided that he was going to transform HEB. It was 36 years ago. And at the time, HEB, I'm sure you know today, HEB is one of the most admired companies in the world.
It's amazing.
It is the most admired supermarket operator in the world. They do so many things right, and they've done things that most would consider impossible. They've basically matched Walmart pricing while delivering a spectacular, amazing customer experience. When Charles began,
and it's not the aisles.
No, but the aisles are a part of it, though.
Yeah.
You go into an HEB store at 9:00 at night after it's done $200,000 or $300,000 worth of business, and most stores would be wrecked.
True.
And they look pretty much like they did at 8:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
All the shelves are faced up. So, but when he began that, he hired a consultant who does similar things what we do. And she said to him, Charles, if you want to transform HEB, it has to start with you. So think about your question.
Wow.
Think about your question, and it doesn't matter whether it's purpose, it's customer experience, it's innovation. Somebody at the top has got to make a decision to change course and to begin a new journey. Has to involve everyone ultimately in the firm, but it's got to start at the top, and it's got to start with a mindset that says we're going to do something different. And it can't be an initiative, it can't be a program, it's got to be a commitment. And when you start one of these journeys, it can't, you have to start it with the idea that it's never going to end. And these cultures that we revere are incredibly perishable. Takes years to build them and just about that long to tear them apart. So we see it a lot in private equity, where there's a change of ownership, and all of a sudden, a PE firm, and I'm not here to blast PE firms.
Sure.
We all have a quantitative bias, whether we admit to it or not. But organizations are acquired because they're successful, and the new owner oftentimes will begin to make changes to improve, financial performance without really understanding what they bought. So,
they didn't grow with it, so they don't see.
So doing some sort of diagnostics to really figure out what you bought, including the culture. Culture is one of those things that, we're talking seriously to the guys at UT about helping them with their executive education and their executive MBA programs and so forth. Not in an academic sense, but just to come in and add, some real world stuff. And it's got to be done. It's got to be done with finesse, and it's got to be done without making people wrong. Most of the leaders we're talking to and we're talking about, they're not wrong. This is the way they've been trained, and so we have to meet people where they are, and we have to bring them along.
That's huge. Yeah.
I view what we do very much like an internist, like a primary care doctor, like a really good diagnostician. So if I'm your doctor, if I'm your internist, what I want for you is optimal physical health. So I want you to eat right. I want you to exercise. I want you to get plenty of sleep. I don't want you to smoke cigarettes or drink too much whiskey, or, you know, I mean, there's certain things I want you to do. Not everybody's going to do that. So we have to meet people where they are and bring them along as quickly as we can. And it's not all at once usually.
And people that are at the top, I'm starting to see this correlation where your personal standards in the shadows in your own time are a direct reflection of your standards in where you operate, whether it's where you work, in your family, whatever. Where you have organizations that are struggling, and as attitude is reflective of leadership, and if you do want to change the attitude in your organization, you want to change the performance, adopt a new culture and change. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that would really start with the individual and their habits, their perspectives, their mindset, yeah. their physical health,
right.
And what are they doing every day to set themselves up to operate at a higher level than where they've been, right? So it can't just start necessarily in the business and go, let me check the boxes, like you've said, and this is where there's so much work and so many spokes to this thing. But if people really want to instigate real change in their organization, what are some key things that you've seen people turn around in their organization that started in their own personal life?
There have been plenty of examples of leaders and organizations, CEOs, founders who have had some sort of cataclysmic personal experience that has driven their need or want or desire for transformation. You know, they're a recovering alcoholic, or they've gotten sober and want to be healthy and want to see that transformed, their, you know, spread throughout their organization, that new life, if you will. There are people who have had spiritual experiences. There are people who have had near-death experiences. And a lot of times those, you called it an aha experience earlier, a lot of times we see that where it's been some event that triggered, you know, their transformation. In the case of Quick Trip, you know, Quick Trip, I believe, was founded in 1957 by Chet Cadjo's dad, and I want to say he accidentally, but he opened a convenience store and found that he was making a bunch of money. And he was a good guy. He was a faith-based guy, and he was a good man. He wanted to do things for others. And he said, boy, this is really cool. You know, I just learned how to do this, and I'm making really good money, and I enjoy it. And that became his purpose, was to provide opportunity for others, for employees to grow and succeed. In all of these cases, it's, you know, it takes commitment, it takes hard work. In most cases, it takes coaching. You know, so you see an awful lot of CEOs, and these companies will hire outside coaches, will hire people like us. We're certainly not the last word on wisdom, but I mean, they'll hire people like us to help coach them and to be a thought partner, a sounding board, someone they can talk to. I mean, that's, you know, I find very, very few super successful CEOs who don't have a coach of some sort.
You have a coach?
Yes. I do. I have 3, as a matter of fact.
Really?
Yeah.
When did you get your own coach?
I've had several over the years. Right now, I have 3, and one I've had for 15 years. My favorite one, well, not my favorite one. One of my favorite ones actually died of pancreatic cancer in 2009, so I had to get a new one. But it's just, you know, we go back to, you know, you called it emotional intelligence, awareness, whatever you want to call it. People who are really phenomenal leaders know they don't know it all, know they haven't learned everything there is to learn, and so they use a coach, or in some cases a couple of them, to help them stay on track, and to hold them accountable.
That's the key, and I think that's good leadership.
Yeah,
that's a big key of that.
It is.
Do you think in like QT and other organizations, even here with your team, how do you have effective accountability that isn't micromanaging, but it gives, to me, it's like I have 3 kids and my toddler, life is like living in the bumper lane of the bowling alley, right? He's just bouncing everywhere, but you got to give him those barriers so he can just know to run and really enjoy what he loves to do, whether it's throwing water in the bathroom or, you know, banging pots and pans. But as adults, as in the workplace especially, how do you have effective accountability and not like demoralize your team?
Well, I'm not sure that I'm a great person to ask that, because I'm not very good at details at this stage in my career. So I'm self-aware enough to know what I'm good at and what I'm not. For some reason, I used to be a really good operator, you know, when I was running 500 convenience stores or, you know, 100 supermarkets. But, you know, at this stage in my life, I got things coming at me from every which direction. And so I'm hiring the next generation of leadership, people who complement me, who are a lot better at managing things than I am.
That circle. That circle.
Yeah, because what I'm really good at and what I really want to do is I want to do the writing, I want to do the research, I want to do the speaking, I want to be kind of out there leading some of the innovation, not all of it, but some of it. And you know, I'm just not that good a manager anymore. So I'm self-aware enough to know that and to be passing the baton to people who are better at it than I am. I'll tell you one quick story. So the third interview I conducted for the Total Performance Leadership Architecture, which was set up for me by a gal named Patty Moore, who's a major league superstar. She was the president of Sonic. She's the chairman of the board of Red Robin. She's on the board at One Oak. She's on the board at Quick Trip. And she and a group of investors owned John C. Maxwell's leadership advisory firm for a while.
Okay.
So I mean, this woman is like, you know, amazing. And so I engaged her when I started thinking about writing the second book, and she coached me on how to do it. And she said, "Here's exactly what we need. You know, we need stories. She said, I'm all bought into the 9 principles. Got that. But then I want you to tell us stories about how specific leaders did specific things that we can learn to do in our own organizations. Don't need another Jim Collins. Don't need another Tom Peters. Don't need another Mark, you know, none of those where you got to read half the book to figure out what the methodology was. Yeah. Tell us stories about this. So the second, she was the first interview. She volunteered to be the first interview. Chet was second, and a guy who prefers to remain anonymous was running a $17 billion oil and gas conglomerate in Tulsa. So now you can go figure out who it is. But when I sat down with him at a table kind of like this one in his office, I said, "What do you think makes a great CEO?" And the first thing he said was self-awareness. Wow. Which surprised me. Wow. Surprised me. And he went on to tell me why he said that. And that part will stay anonymous. But he said, now I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. You can't have a great company without a great vision. You got to have a compelling vision around which to engage your workforce. Everybody's got to know what it is. It's got to be crystal clear.
It's that beacon.
True north.
Yeah.
And that's, that should flow from purpose, mission, vision, values. All that works together. That's the glue. He said, the problem is I'm not a visionary. I'm just not. I just don't have that gene. He said, I'm an operator. I'm the nuts and bolts guy. I'm the guy who can, dot the I's and cross the T's. Yeah. And he said, so my number 2, my chief operating officer, and I have role reversal. So it's kind of like a man and wife who have, the wife does all the yard work and the husband cooks. He said, I am the operator in this scenario, and he, my number 2 guy, who would normally be the operator, is the visionary.
If you lean in on your strengths.
Yeah. So, I mean, he had one of those. He said, look, I'm not very good at this. I recognize that it has to be done. I'm not very good at it, so I'm gonna complement my strengths with somebody who's really good at it. And it worked well for 20 years.
When businesses start to grow, you're wearing multiple hats.
Oh, yeah.
At some point, it's like, do you think some people have a hard time letting go of some of those hats? Because they've been wearing him for so long.
Yeah.
They don't know how to move forward without giving the hat to somebody else.
Don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a matter of not wanting to. In most cases, it's a matter of, I mean, I know tons of founder CEOs who want to let go, who, maybe they're in their late 70s, or there's a need to turn the business over to somebody else. They just don't know how.
If you got a CEO or a founder that's in this position where they're coming to the point of some self-awareness, realizing there's some things that they're doing that they're not the best at, and it could be problematic for the company.
Right.
But they're not really sure how to determine who to really delegate or invite. What kind of piece of advice would we give them if they're in that position?
Well, I'd probably introduce them to Liz Townsend, who runs our leadership advisory practice, because she's certified in Gallup Strengths Finder. She's certified in Blueprint Toolset, which is a really powerful instrument to measure our limiting beliefs, and then a process of learning to overwrite those limiting beliefs with enabling beliefs. So I'd probably do that, because I just don't think, as a general statement, people can discover these things on their own. I mean, it's possible. I mean, they could spend lots of time writing and researching and doing all that, but I don't know very many CEOs who have the time to do that.
Yeah. One of the quotes that I got from your book that really stood out to me, it said, "A good plan well executed beats a perfect plan with mediocre execution."
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, it's one of my favorite books is a book called Flawless Execution, which by a guy named Peter Block, and so that sounds like he would be all about perfection, but one of the things he keeps emphasizing in the book is give yourself the freedom to be imperfect. Give yourself the freedom to be imperfect. We don't even relate to perfect. There's only been one perfect person on this earth, and it was a couple thousand years ago, so it's not likely we're going to see any more of that. Mark McFarland wrote a book called The Breakthrough Company. It's a really great book. And he said, a strategy that you develop in 90 minutes is 90% as good as a strategy would take 90 days to develop. The days of 3 to 5 year planning horizons in most companies are gone. Now, for Exxon and Shell, some of those, they might still have those, but for most of us, there's planning horizons that long. We just don't have that luxury. We don't even know what the world's going to look like in a year. So his recommendation, and one that I absolutely agree with, is set your strategy. Make sure it's tied to purpose, mission, vision, values. That's the glue. That's what holds everything together. Do OKRs. I like OKRs because they give you stretch goals, organizational, objectives and key results. And then hit the reset button every 90 days. McFarland actually said that. He said, get together and say, here's what we're trying to accomplish. Here's where we made progress. Here's where we're falling behind or are stuck. And what do we need to do to get back on track? So if you hit the reset button every 90 days and ask, and not a 3-week retreat, but in a pretty quick, meeting, are we still on track? Are we still doing what we need to be doing? Or do we need to make adjustments? And to make sure everybody's, continues to be aligned.
You said finding the right talent isn't easy, especially when recruiting for specific niche roles requiring very unique skill sets. What are some common mistakes that organizations make when they do hire? Oh,
it's such a magnificent question. You should do this for a living.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate that.
So what we find in 95% of the cases, Accenture says only 5% of companies get the talent thing right. What we find in 95% of the companies and 95+% of search specs that we see floating around out there is that they are woefully inadequate. And they're generally just a list of attributes all based on background, experience, and credential. We reviewed a very important spec for a new position for one of our clients last week. And it started with position description, requirements, responsibilities, and it was all about credentials, all about experience. There was nothing in the spec about why, about an opportunity positioning. Why would an A player who's head down and happy doing a great job for somebody else want to come to work for you? None of that. No explanation of the culture. No description of the culture. No salient points about the company itself. What it was up to. What's important to the company. So now, if you think about that, over almost 30 years now, I guess I've been back in search now. It'll be 30 years in March of next year. We've studied about 5,000 failed executive placements, and almost half of those failures fall into the category of cultural misalignment.
Right person, wrong seat?
No. Wrong fit for the company.
Got it.
And it's not about good or bad, right or wrong. So you could take a superstar out of HEB and send him to Kroger, they'd probably get fired. Even though they both look like they do the same thing, the cultures are very, very different. So if you think about that, almost half the failures fall into the cultural misalignment, and almost the other half, like 47% or something like that, fall into a category I call performance expectations. Couldn't do the job. So
they just didn't have the skills?
Couldn't do that job.
Oh, I see.
So there's a guy named Ram Charan, who's a famous Harvard professor, probably the best known board CEO selector on the planet. And he's written books on the subject, lots of research. And he says there are 4 things that successful boards do. They're successful at hiring CEOs that unsuccessful boards don't. And I would submit to you that these principles apply to every single position in your company. It's what we're trying to do here. So now so these are big, important decisions, right? So you're going to hire a new CEO for IBM, or you're going to hire a new CEO for Home Depot or whatever. He said there are 4 things that successful boards do that unsuccessful boards don't. Number 1, they get clear about the culture fit. They'll spend 3 weeks, if they need to spend 3 weeks, to really understand the culture, both the culture in its existing state and the aspirational culture. What are we trying to build?
2 different things, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It can be very different. And I mean,
never heard that. That's fascinating.
When Lou Gerstner took over, IBM, he was a Pepsi guy. He wasn't a technology guy, but he was brought in to transform IBM, which he did successfully. So the culture fit's one thing. The second thing he talks about is what he calls the pivot. And the pivot in his vernacular is, what is this person expected to do? What 2 or 3 or 4 things do they have to bring with them and be able to deliver for you to be able to look back a year from now and say, this guy or this gal has knocked it out of the park? Are you with me on that? So culture fit and performance expectations. The number 3 things that successful boards do is they are flexible about where the person comes from. And the 4th thing is they allow for imperfections. Now, if you kind of wrap all that up and you can package that in your mind, we got to get the culture fit right, and we got to get the performance expectations right. And then we're going to allow for imperfections, and we're going to be flexible about where they come from. You compare that to the way most people are doing it. So you get this position description with 75 things that you say you need. Great leader, great listener. This is all palaver, really. I mean, none of this is actionable. An MBA from whatever. I mean, so did you hear me mention education in any of these? So I just think in a lot of cases we're focused badly, and we're looking for one of our associates calls them purple squirrels or unicorns. I mean, yes, there are certain positions that are hard to to find, because anything that has to do with accounting is hard to find. Anything, assistant controllers, CFOs, they're always in big demand because there are not enough people coming out of school that are trained in that. But the big deal, in my view, the big deal that causes churn and loss of momentum and loss of morale and all those kinds of things are lack of focus on those two things: culture fit and performance. And so, once again, it's if you got 95% of the companies doing it another way, how do you correct that? Well, we're trying to do everything we can to correct it, but it's an uphill struggle.
As somebody asked me this recently, they said outside of a profession that demands the degree, legal, architecture,
right,
medical, all that,
right,
is a college degree what it used to be? And then for those that maybe didn't go the college degree route, how do they compete for a job that says, a bachelor's requirement or a master's requirement, but they've got 10, 15 years experience, and they may not apply, but should they apply?
Man, that's a complex question. So I got to be careful about this because I'm a big believer in education. If I wasn't, I wouldn't have gone back to school at 33 and gotten an undergraduate degree. And I've become an education junkie. I'm actually going to be back in school in August.
Really?
Yeah, I'm taking a master's degree at the UT Austin is doing a program here in Houston called Human Dimensions of Organizations. And it's something I want to do. I think it complements, what we're doing here. I think it'll make me better. But it's not, education is not the end all be all, nor has it ever been in my view. And I think there are companies that are getting wise to that. I mean, is a college degree necessarily the ticket, or should it be? Now, if you're an engineer,
right,
you have to have the degree, right?
Yeah.
I think. If you're a doctor, there's certain technical training that you have to have,
right,
to do certain jobs. But I just don't think.
Is it more of a perspective of you completed something?
I think it's one of those boxes that a lot of people just think they have to check.
Right.
One of the ones that I find most frustrating is the one that is the one where an MBA or a graduate degree is required. Now, obviously, if I didn't think graduate degrees had value, I wouldn't be I wouldn't have done and about to do what I'm doing. But I don't think it's the end all be all. I think the person's DNA, their what's in their heart, what's in their work ethic, their attitude, how well they align with the culture, and how well they can do the job. So, I don't think, when Lou Gerstner went to work for IBM, I don't think they were looking for a Pepsi guy. I don't think they were looking for a consumer products guy necessarily. But there's way too much emphasis, I believe, on pedigree of all different types. I mean, you think about the unmitigated disaster that occurred when Bob Nardelli, who was, Jeff Immelt was number two to Jeff Immelt to replace Jack Welch at GE. And back then, GE was the, oh my goodness, anybody who has GE training. So he was hired as the CEO of Home Depot, and it was an absolute disaster.
They were hoping he was going to bring that over.
Bring what?
Yeah.
I mean, here's a company that had built a powerful culture. I mean, a top performing company by anyone's standard, and it needed someone. I'm not saying this to you as the last word on wisdom, but in my view, it needed someone who understood that culture, who understood that Home Depot had built a brand based on a particular type of customer experience, that is pretty easy to articulate.
Right.
Somebody who understood that, somebody who appreciated that, and somebody who wanted to build on something great. Instead, Nardelli basically dismantled it. And the current leadership is trying to restore some of that, but it's not what it used to be.
Ray Dalio said recently, when you're hiring, you're interviewing, you're recruiting, show them your warts, which I thought was an interesting statement. Show them the ugly part so that they see the culture of being resourceful and resilient, what that really looks like. Because we can all paint a beautiful picture of best case scenario when you're interviewing people.
Right.
It's like dating. Right.
Well, unfortunately, it is with very similar results.
It get ghosted a lot.
About 50% failure rate.
But for company, that's an element of vulnerability that companies don't necessarily want to show the wart, because they don't either want to scare people off, or B, because they're afraid that maybe their ugly part makes them unattractive as a place to work, when there's really no company that has it all together. The wart's going to be different for every different business, but how can a business feel confident in being somewhat transparent into people that don't know them yet, to where it would be a great way to let somebody see behind the veil for a little bit, to go, because interviewing, it should be a two-way street.
Right.
It shouldn't be, we've got an opportunity and you're lucky that we're sitting here, because that's not really what it's about. No. But how do you show a wart effectively? And then on the other side of the table, when you're the candidate, how do you show a wart that would be transparent enough to build trust?
Great question. And so it's one of the things, our stick rate at the 2-year mark is north of 92%.
Wow.
Against a global average of about 55%.
Wow.
Once again, I wouldn't present our trademark foresight process to you as the last word on wisdom, but it's
pretty good.
But it's the best thing we've been able to find to facilitate matches that work and last. And the only way a match is going to work and last is that if both parties go into it with their eyes wide open. So we advocate, doing, you don't have to bear everything, but you need to let your candidates know where you are and where you're trying to go. And it's quite common for us to say to candidates, look, we have some challenges here. We have some challenges in this company, and here's what they look like. There's no point in us putting you into a situation where we're gonna have organ rejection because you think it's one thing and it turns out to be something else.
That's a great analogy.
The exact same thing occurs the other way around. When we present candidates, we present strengths, weaknesses, warts, and all. We do reference audits near the end of the process with finalist candidates, not just the finalists, but finalist candidates. And we're asking references, generally 8 open-ended questions, and we ask them to rate a candidate. We ask them to rate a specific candidate on 50 or so different attributes. Most of the time, attributes that we've identified as being important and important to the client, and we force the client to rank them in terms of their importance. The reason we do that is we're trying to deliver as many things as the client wants and needs. Innovation, for an example, creativity. There are certain people who are just not creative. They're just not. And the other thing we're trying to do is we're trying to show the client strengths and weaknesses. If you look at one of our reference grids, it's got a list of it's got 2 superiors, 2 subordinates, 2 peers. It's got this attribute grid. It's got numeric ratings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the average on the end. And it's you can clearly see patterns. You can see patterns where people are weak or need development in certain areas. And what we don't want to do is present somebody as being perfect, because there's no such thing as perfection.
Have you ever found a candidate for a company through your search that, from what the company said they were wanting versus the candidate that you found, would actually be a really good fit, but it wasn't who the company thought would be a good fit?
Oh, all the time. All the time. And as a matter of fact, we started a CEO search for a private equity firm here in town for a specialty chemical company. And we started the CEO search. It was really interesting because the guy who brought us in was frustrated because he had done 2 CEO searches previously that failed, 2 in a row. And they looked exactly like what I just described a few minutes ago. The guys they hired were very impressive, but they couldn't do the job. They couldn't deliver the performance expectations. So it was for that reason they invited us in, hired us to do the CEO search. When we got into the needs analysis, which is a really deep dive about, you know, the culture of the organization, the performance expectations, what's needed, because we're there to help the client achieve their business objectives, not to do anything in a vacuum.
Yeah.
We're not there to fill a seat in a vacuum. When we got into it, the determination we made, and, you know, understanding that we're hired help. I mean, we're not on a leadership team. We're not owners. So, you know, at the end of the day, it's the client's call. But our recommendation was, you know, you don't need a CEO. You have 3 founders, 2 of whom could easily be the CEO. Now, this is, you know, this happens in private equity. You buy. This company was pre-revenue. Okay, so you had 3 really smart scientists who had developed this really cool chemical compound, which turned out to be wildly successful. And we said, you know, what you need is a chief revenue officer. You need revenue, because if you don't start doing revenue, I mean, this whole thing. Yeah. So they said, okay, well, yeah, let's do that. So we placed the chief revenue officer, and, you know, in my view, they sold the company early, you know, prematurely, but the guy was so successful, they wound up selling it to Berkshire Hathaway at a pretty huge profit. But so it's there are oftentimes, you made the analogy earlier, you know, the analogy between dating and hiring, dating and marriage, and, you know, the hiring process. Very similar. You know, we date and often marry for the wrong reasons, and we hire for the wrong reasons.
Gary Chapman's book of 5 love languages. I look at that in the context of core values, of like what's the language we're speaking in the things that are meaningful to us and what gives us a sense of fulfillment, right? And it's not always money, but when you start,
money's usually number 7 on the list.
Interesting.
5, 6, or 7. Yeah.
It's aspects of our humanity, things that give us a sense of feeling important, seen, heard, appreciated, validated, respected. Right. If the role that you're looking for, you need to find somebody that's speaking the same language or has the appropriate core values to who they are, because then the other things can, you work through those. But when the core values are aligned, that's when you have somebody that I think buys in. Right, because now they have a sense of they don't have the risk aversion, because they feel like they're in a position that I can thrive here. Right. You may not know everything, and you're going to make mistakes, but you know that you've got some runway to thrive because the core values are aligned. Where you talk about vision and purpose, mission, that these things are aligning to. Of course, a lot of people don't know what their core values necessarily, maybe what their love language is. People get asked all the time, actually, I don't even know what language I speak. But in your upper level search, where you do have people with a lot more self-awareness.
I wouldn't assume that, but.
Okay. That's fair. Which is why you guys help people do what they do. Right. You made a quote in your book, and it said, why CEOs fail, or the book, Why CEOs Fail. And it said the number one reason CEOs fail is due to arrogance.
Hubris. Right. Number one reason companies fail. Number one reason CEOs and senior executives, and in some cases, recent MBA graduates fail. Arrogance.
Can they turn that around?
You know, I think that's probably one of the hardest things to turn around. You know, I've seen, you know, people can change, and people do change, but they have to be willing to change.
John Maxwell talks about that.
Yeah. I mean, you know, we had, you know, I told you we had one of our most successful CEO placements in here a few weeks ago who said, I'm not in the people fixing business. You know, I'm willing to coach people, but, you know, they have to be willing. So this arrogance thing, and you said it earlier, more often than not is masking deep-seated insecurity. So that's a psychological problem. And I love this stuff. I mean, I love the study of the way the mind works. You know, I love mind setting. I love all that stuff. But I got to be really careful, and I think others, my ilk, have to be really careful. I'm not a psychologist, and I don't get paid to be a psychologist. And so, I look for people who have confidence right up to the line. Where if you step over the line, now it's arrogance. So I don't really want people in the firm who don't have confidence, because there's not a lot of people who want to sign up with a consultant who's not confident.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
You imbue someone with a little confidence that you can help them. But I'm clear, with my people, and I'm clear with my clients. I don't know it all. I just don't. And the older I get and the more I learn, the more I know I don't know it all. So that's there's a fine line there.
You mentioned millennials earlier.
Yep.
And that generation does tend to get a bad rep. But
which I don't think it's deserved.
And I agree, because, and here's my take on it. You look at the thing, they will grind their face off as long as there's a purpose behind it.
Right.
But a lot of the Gen X, older generations are looking at the millennials going, well, these people don't have a work ethic. It's because they're so purpose driven. There has to be a reason why they are willing to grind their face off for something. And it's not necessarily monetary.
Right.
With this growing generation of future leaders that are coming through, how can companies change the perspective of millennials and harness the power of that generation?
You're going to get tired of hearing me say this, but it's all about mindset. Without what we call, our vernacular is a high performance mindset. Until you address your limiting beliefs and begin to replace them with enabling beliefs, you have no chance of engaging anybody or affecting any real lasting transformation. I know of a CEO today who will remain anonymous, who runs a huge company, international, 100,000 plus employees, who has lost pretty much all of his female leaders and doesn't really understand why. And it's not about, a lot of this stuff is not, you can't just check the box.
Right.
But if subconsciously, and our subconscious minds drive everything we do, buy that?
100%.
So our subconscious,
you and I are on the same page.
We have these tapes that play up here.
Yeah.
I was reading, one of my favorite books is called Born to Win, and it was written by a PhD and an EDD, and they said, by the time a child is 8 years old, a baby is an information-seeking magnet. I didn't realize that until fairly recently. But we have, by the time we're 8 years old, we've already decided who we are. So we've got these tapes that play up here that drive how we think, what we think we're capable of, what we think our organization's capable of, and how we're going to behave. So if a CEO has an unconscious bias toward, you name it, millennials, women leaders, people of color, it doesn't matter what it is. If they have an unconscious bias, it is going to show up in their behavior. And so that's the reason I say this particular CEO, who I happen to think an awful lot of in many respects, I doubt seriously understands why he's lost as many female leaders as he has. And the only reason I know is because a bunch of them have told me.
Wow.
So you can't fake it. I mean, you can fake some things till you make it, but if you have those kinds of biases, it's going to show up in the way you promote people, the way you recognize people, the way you speak to them in meetings. There's just no way to change it. There's
a mantra that I've lived by for quite some time. The one thing about people is the words they say are who they profess to be. Their actions reveal who they truly are.
Yep.
So that mantra is actions with a separator.
Right.
Comes all day long, and even I'm the idea guy.
Right.
Okay, where's your executor? Where's the guy that actually executes on the ideas, right? Because that's the one that's figure-outable, resourceful, resilient. They're confident, but they're humble enough because they're learning every time they execute what worked, what didn't, and they just continually refine the process, which is exactly what you've been doing.
Right.
for a very long time.
Yeah, and look, we still got lots of things to work on, lots and lots of things to work on. But one of the cool things I guess we started this about 2 years ago. This employee appreciation program, which is split into two plans. One that has to do with value appreciation, the enterprise value appreciation. The other one has to do with, sharing performance bonuses. So everybody gets rated. So I have 17 people who evaluate me, and everybody gets to see the ratings.
Wow.
Yeah. So everybody in the firm.
I don't know of a lot of people that would be comfortable doing that.
Is evaluated and my compensation is based on basically the same formula as everybody else's. If we sell the firm or if we have a change in control, which, hopefully is to the new generation of leadership, when I decide to, go do whatever I'm going to do, but I think I'll probably die here. But my compensation is, I get the first little bit of it, but then everything else is split by a point system, and I have no preference over anybody else.
Wow.
So you got to be comfortable with that kind of transparency and that kind of vulnerability. I was not terribly happy with my numbers 2 years ago.
Really?
No. So I've had to work on that. That's kind of a wake-up call.
Wow.
It was, yeah.
So the reviews that you got clearly didn't match what you felt.
No, and so one of the things we do, so we do assessments on mindset, as an example. Liz has a partner who his name is Michael O'Brien. He's developed a lot of intellectual property. We have a partner that has developed a lot of intellectual property around mindset, and all this stuff is validated. There's a way to measure a leader's mindset and measure the organizational mindset and to measure the effect of the leader's mindset on his or her direct reports. So, it's all fun. It's exciting. It's also a little unsettling if you're not used to that kind of scrutiny.
But if you have enough humility and you're constantly learning, and you do want to learn how to be better, then you are. Like you said, it's painful,
right? So it's interesting because one of the attributes that I really like and that we look for here is an intense curiosity. If somebody's intensely curious, if they consider themselves a lifelong learner, if they know they don't know it all, if they view this as a journey, as an adventure, and not as a threat. There's so many. It's so easy to look at these things as a threat. I think there are a lot of CEOs and boards and senior leaders who would really like to do, a real deep dive assessment on their culture, but they're a little bit afraid of it.
I think it's our deep conditioning when we were young that if we make a mistake, then there's something wrong with us. It proves that we're incapable.
Right.
It merely reveals areas that we can improve.
Right.
But it's that deep conditioning.
It's not remedial.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the points that we try to make to the executives we're coaching is that this is not remedial. We're not doing this because there's something wrong.
Right.
This is developmental. We're doing this because there's potential yet to be unleashed.
It's changing the relationship when it comes to mistakes and gaps in what we know and self-awareness, right?
Quickest way to shut down innovation in a company is start punishing people for making mistakes.
Can you say that again? That was really good.
Quickest way to shut down innovation in a company is to punish people for making mistakes.
I mean, it's almost narcissism. I want you to do something different, but then if you make a mistake.
It's also a little bit of human nature. I mean,
true.
Especially if it's an expensive mistake.
Right.
But if you want to innovate, you've got to give people enough autonomy to try their own things. One of the things we're excited about doing here is, since Liz has become certified in StrengthsFinder, is we want to put everyone in the firm, every single person in the firm has a career track. Everyone. If we don't think they have the potential to go the distance with us, we won't hire them. So we don't
clarity.
Even summer interns. First of all, we don't hire summer interns. If we're going to hire an intern, it's with the idea that we intend to keep them, long term.
Got it. Yeah.
And so when we can put people, I'm excited about this next chapter in our development, because I think we're going to be able to identify strengths and put people in positions to win. And right now, what we're doing is we're putting people in a position to do what they want to do, what they're really interested in. So it's going to be interesting to see how good I think we're going to learn some things on how to do that better.
Rob, what is something that you know now that you wish you would have known?
Oh, that's easy. That's an easy one.
Okay.
If I had known 27 years ago what I know today, I would have started this firm with purpose, mission, vision, values.
How did you start it?
Well, first of all, I didn't want to start a business. I had no interest in starting a business.
Really? And here you are.
Really. I had been with a search firm in Tampa for 2.5 years. I was the executive vice president, which basically meant that I got to do a whole bunch of stuff for the firm for free. And I was making really good money, and I was having fun. I was bringing people into the business. I was the firm's top revenue producer, and I thought I would probably stay. But then one of my boss walked into a conference room one Friday afternoon and heard me teaching people how to do search better. How to do a better client interview, how to write a better spec, how to vet candidates better, how to basically, it was the beginning of what is now, trademark foresight. And he called me into his office and he said, if I ever hear you teaching that crap again, I'll fire you on the spot, which I thought was a little short-sighted. But, it was his firm, and I tried to explain to him why I thought it was important that we had, an obligation. Our fees are huge, and we had an obligation to do the right thing. And he said, Rob, you're a misguided young man. You're all about how long people stay and how well they do and how much they contribute. You're all about the art and science of executive search. We're in the business of executive search. We're making a boatload of money and don't want to hear about your misguided sense of altruism anymore. So when I started this, it's just so I'd have a place to practice my way. I could
core values didn't align.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So over the years, somehow or another, I lost some focus on that.
Really?
Yeah.
Just because of in the business and trying to grow it?
It's just, it's really easy. Now we have, these days we have a leadership team, a mastermind group that, I think we're doing a pretty good job of holding each other accountable. Mm-hmm. But I didn't really have that for many years. So,
you're almost kind of your own test case.
Oh, we absolutely are. Absolutely.
That's amazing.
We eat our own dog food. We take our own assessments. I hired a consultant, and had no idea how I was going to pay for it in 2019 to come in and help us do this stuff. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we've learned is, you gotta, if you have people who, and that's the reason I said, if I could start all over, and I've given up all hope of a better past. Mm-hmm. You understand that? Mm-hmm. So that ain't going to happen.
Just a lesson when you look back. That's it.
But if I could do it all over again, I would hire to purpose, mission, vision, values. Mm-hmm. And when I had someone who trampled all over my values, I'd let them go. Mm. I wouldn't hire them in the first place. And if I did hire them and they persisted in trampling all over our values, I'd just let them go. And that was it's taken a very long time to learn that and to follow through on it. And that's what we tell our clients to do.
Right.
So we've finally gotten to a point where I think we're operating in, nobody is ever operating in complete integrity. That's not possible. But I think we're at the point where we're operating in near perfect integrity. Mm. We practice what we preach. We do what we practice what we recommend to our clients. We know it's not easy. One of the things I think that differentiates us from a lot of our competitors is, we've been operators. Liz was an operator, senior operator with My Fit Foods, and 24-hour fitness before that. She's run her own companies. She's been she's got stripes as a consultant. I've run businesses with 10,000 employees. So we know this stuff is not easy. Mm-hmm. We know that it's hard, and we know it requires a special mindset. But it's an adventure. It's fun. It's exciting, and we just want to make a difference. We want to help make the world a better place.
What was your beacon growing up, as far as somebody that you saw, like, man, that person, like, you began to almost emulate their example when you were younger, when you were in college, as you
it was the guy I've described. It was Don Gates, the number 2 guy in this Safeway division I spent 8 years with. Spent 9, but the last year wasn't very much fun. Mm-hmm. He was my model. And since then, look, Gates wasn't perfect, but he was, people loved him. People really, they weren't afraid of him. They didn't want to disappoint him. Mm-hmm. He was a great leader. He treated us like adults. He kept us informed. As I look, I've got a flip chart over there that's got the 9 principles listed on it. And, our leadership architecture will never be finished. We're always working on it. We're always honing it. We're always trying to make it better. But as I think back, almost 50 years ago, he checked all those boxes. I mean, he really did. And had no formal education. Mm. So he was, he's still a guy I think about often.
Mm-hmm. For the business owner that's heard this and they're kind of getting a little self-awareness of not doing as well as maybe I think, what's their next step?
Well, you could call us. That would be one idea. But I think as I said numerous times, I think it starts with mindset. Mm-hmm. There are what the total performance leadership architecture does, and there are a lot of systems out there. There's Covey's system. There's Lencioni. I mean, there's a lot of these guys who have written about this stuff. Virtually everything we've read is compatible with total performance leadership. Mm-hmm. But this is a little more disciplined architecture and a new pair of glasses, if you will, a way to look at the organization and to be able to check your organizational health often, because it's incredibly perishable. Mm-hmm. So, in every one of those principles, there's a way to determine whether or not the principle's at work. There's a way to measure all this stuff. Mm-hmm. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. You can't predict it.
Right. What's an ideal company for you that's a candidate to work with?
Very good question, and it has nothing to do with size or capital structure. Mm-hmm. We work with private equity firms. We work with big companies, small companies. Most of our companies tend to be lower middle market, but that's only because we have access to the senior leaders and the board in those companies. Mm-hmm. A little hard for us to get access to the board and the senior leaders at Kroger or any of these really big companies. But it has more to do with the nature of the relationship. If somebody wants help, if somebody recognizes that we represent an important resource, then we're a good fit. I think if companies are interested in culture, that makes them potentially a very good fit. I've been writing a blog now for 164 weeks, goes to about 25,000 people. A lot of the people who have been reading this are now starting to say, hey, maybe we could have a conversation about, what you guys do.
Yeah.
But it's, that's not to say that every client has to be perfect. And we do still have clients who hire us to just do a search. That's all they want us to do. That's mm-hmm. fine. But, I'll go back to the internist analogy. What we want for you is optimal cultural health, and we'd love to help you do that. But you gotta be a willing participant in that.
So step 2 is to get your book, right?
That wouldn't hurt.
High Performance Human Capital Leadership.
Wouldn't hurt. And we have we do not have the second book, the Total Performance Leadership book, out, but there is a total performance leadership guide, resource guide,
Okay.
which I'm happy to send to anybody who requests it. But it's a pretty detailed explanation of what the overall architecture is about, what its purpose is, a detailed description of each one of the 9 principles, a set of resources, generally, research pieces. I think there are probably an average of 25 or so per principle. So these are free resources that you can use to kind of check yourself. Kind of like, there are things you can do to check your cholesterol and your heart rate and all those things. Still pays to have a really good primary care doc in your corner.
Rob, last question. What would be one thing that people would be surprised to know about you?
Oh my gosh, I'm an open book. I have no secrets that I'm aware of. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I guess that's one of the things that people sometimes are surprised to hear. I haven't had a drink since October 27th of 2006, so about 16 and a half years. It was one of those.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I give me no credit for that. That the credit all goes to God, because I tried to quit many times, and it wasn't until I just surrendered that the compulsion, the desire to drink, left. But that was a big aha moment for me.
What was that aha moment for you? What became the catalyst of I got to get sober?
Well, it was a realization that didn't occur all at once. What did occur all at once was my willingness to let go, to just surrender. But I was born an alcoholic. I think a lot of people are. I had 3 uncles, none of whom lived to be 60. All 3 alcoholics. All 3 died way too early. All 3 good men, good family men, good providers. All 3 good businessmen. But they just drank too much. And there are some of us, and I'm in that group, who just don't have the ability to drink. We don't have the ability to put any mind-altering substance in our bodies, because it sets up an unnatural craving that's really
too tempting. Just builds.
It's a craving. I mean, it's like I got to have it. So we have an old saying, one drink's not enough, 1,000 or one drink is too many, 1,000's not enough. And so it's just an ongoing, nightmarish struggle. And this disease, in all of its forms, alcoholism, addiction to pills, and there are all kinds of other addictions, addictions to sex, shopping, gambling, whatever. But the substance abuse addiction alone affects, they're about 12% of the adult population who are substance abused or substance addicted, and that affects, almost everybody's been affected by substance abuse. Yeah. So it's I'm a regular AA guy. I support the recovery community. I'm happy to be a part of it. It's given me, it's reinforced my purpose, and so sometimes that surprises people to know that. But I'm open about it. So
I think it definitely speaks to your accountability as an individual. Holding yourself accountable and humility, knowing some of your own weaknesses.
Yeah, well, I have that.
Rob, where can people connect with you?
Pretty easy to find. My cell phone number is 713-301-6130. My email address is randrews@allanaustin.com. You can reach Liz here, L. Townsend at allanaustin.com. We have all of our partners are on the website. We're all easy to reach. Everybody's cell phone numbers on the website.
And is your blog you've been writing for 146 days? Is it on
164 weeks?
164.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's on the website as well.
It is.
Once a week?
Once a week.
What day?
Every Thursday at 6:30 a.m.
Okay.
Once in a while we'll be a little late, but most weeks, I'd say 155 weeks, it's going out at 6:30 on Thursday morning.
Rob, thank you for your time.
Thank you for coming.
This has been incredibly insightful and enlightening. I have no doubt the people who are going to listen to this are They're going to have a lot of notes, a lot of questions, and hopefully get some questions to you. But it was humbling to come and sit here with you and really pick your brain. That has taken decades to understand. It's helped me. I know it's going to help a lot of people. So truly, thank you for sitting with me today.
Humbled and honored that you're here. Thank you. Guys,
thank you for tuning in today for the episode of 100% Tilted Discussions with Winning Underdogs. You see the links. You want to get in touch with Rob or Alan Austin, click the links below. Until next time, stay tilted.